I never thought the person who would unravel my life would be my straight best friend. Mark and I met in our second year of college, two exhausted freshmen pretending to understand adulthood. He was loud where I was observant, confident where I was cautious. I was openly gay, he was unapologetically straight. The difference never mattered. If anything, it made our friendship feel uncomplicated, safe. By 23, our routines were woven together. Early gym sessions, late-night drives with no destination, coffee after long workdays where we dissected our futures like they were puzzles we could solve with enough honesty. Mark trusted me with everything, his ambitions, his frustrations, his fears about not being enough. I trusted him because he never made me feel like I was too much. I was in a steady relationship with Daniel. 2 years together. Daniel was dependable in a way that steadied my pulse, structured, thoughtful, emotionally present. He remembered small details, like how I took my tea or when I had a stressful deadline. Loving him felt like standing on solid ground. Mark had Jessica. They'd been together longer than Daniel and I. From the outside, they looked unshakable, shared apartment, shared plans, shared friend groups. But over time, Mark's tone shifted when he talked about her. Less certainty, more sighing. It's not that she's done anything wrong, he told me one evening as we sat in his car outside my apartment. I just don't know if she really sees me. I asked what he meant. She sees who I'm supposed to be, he said. Not who I am when I'm tired. Or confused. It was the first time I noticed the way he looked at me after saying something vulnerable, not like he was waiting for advice, but like he was waiting for reassurance. I told myself that was normal. That best friends are supposed to hold each other's weight. Still, something subtle began to change. Mark lingered a little longer during hugs. Sat a little closer on the couch. His jokes sometimes edged into territory that made my chest tighten, not inappropriate, but charged. You ever think, he asked once, staring straight ahead at the windshield, that people are more fluid than they admit? The question felt less theoretical than he pretended. Sometimes, I said carefully. He nodded, like I'd confirmed something he'd already been considering. I never allowed myself to interpret it beyond curiosity. Mark was straight. That was a fact, not a mystery. And I respected boundaries, especially because I had Daniel. The idea of blurring lines wasn't just dangerous, it felt disloyal. But Mark started choosing me more deliberately. Canceling plans with other friends to come over. Texting me first when something good happened. Calling me when something bad did. One night, after too many drinks at a friend's birthday party, we ended up back at my place because he said he didn't want to go home yet. Daniel was working a late shift, so the apartment was quiet. Mark paced my living room, restless. Do you ever wonder if you're living the life you're supposed to, he asked, or just the one that's expected? Where is this coming from? I asked. He ran a hand through his hair, exhaling sharply. I don't know. I just feel different lately. Different how? He stopped pacing, looked at me in a way that made the room feel smaller. Like maybe I've been ignoring something. My pulse ticked up, though I didn't know why. I forced a steady tone. About Jessica. About everything. Quote. Silence settled between us, heavy but not hostile. He sat beside me, close enough that our shoulders brushed. He didn't move away. Can I ask you something? He said quietly. Of course. He hesitated long enough that I felt the pause in my stomach. Have you ever thought about me, like that? The words didn't land gently. They hit. I searched his face for a punchline, but there wasn't one. His expression wasn't teasing. It was searching, almost fragile. That's not something I let myself think about, I said carefully. Why not? Because you're my best friend, I replied. And you're straight, and I have Daniel. He nodded slowly, like he was cataloging each answer. Right, yeah, of course. But he didn't look embarrassed. He looked thoughtful. A few minutes later, he stood up and said he should go home. He hugged me at the door, longer than usual, tighter than necessary. I felt his breath steady against my shoulder before he pulled back. Forget I asked, he said softly. I will, I promised. But I knew I wouldn't. At 2:17 a.m., my phone buzzed. Mark, I need to ask you something. But you can't judge me. I stared at the message, Daniel asleep in the other room, my heart beating louder than the silence. And for the first time, I wondered if some rules aren't broken in a moment. But in the decision to answer a text, I should have ignored Mark's message. Instead, I replied, "You can tell me anything." The typing bubble appeared almost immediately, then vanished, then returned again, as if he were negotiating with himself in real time. "I can't stop thinking about what I asked you." My chest tightened. Daniel was asleep down the hall, unaware that my loyalty was already thinning in the dark. I told Mark we could talk in the morning. He insisted it couldn't wait. So I called him. His voice sounded different, quieter, stripped of its usual bravado. "I'm not drunk," he said, as if that mattered. "I've been thinking about this for weeks." "About what?" I asked, though I knew. "About you." The word settled heavily between us. Mark exhaled. "I don't think I'm gay, Ethan. I love Jessica, or at least I thought I did. But when I'm with you, I feel something I can't explain." I pressed my palm against my forehead, trying to think clearly. "Feeling close to someone doesn't mean it's more than close," he interrupted. "When you look at me, I feel understood. Wanted, not judged. And lately I've been wondering if maybe I've just never let myself question anything." The honesty in his tone disarmed me. This wasn't teasing. It wasn't ego. It was confusion, raw and unfiltered. "What are you asking?" I said quietly. He hesitated. "I don't want to ruin what we have. But I need to know if this feeling is real or just in my head." "And how would you figure that out?" My voice was steady, even as my thoughts spiraled. "By being honest about it. By not pretending it's not there." He didn't say the word experiment yet, but it hovered between us. The next few days blurred into secrecy. Mark and I texted constantly, long paragraphs dissecting attraction, identity, fear. He stopped mentioning Jessica unless I asked. I started deleting messages so Daniel wouldn't stumble across them. Each conversation felt intellectual at first, almost philosophical. We discussed fluidity, social expectations, the difference between emotional and physical desire. But beneath the analysis was something simpler, anticipation. Mark suggested we meet alone, no distractions, no alcohol, just clarity. I agreed before I let myself think about what that meant. We met at my apartment again while Daniel was at work. The air felt charged from the moment Mark stepped inside. He didn't pace this time. He sat close, knees almost touching mine. "I don't want labels," he said. "I just want to understand what I feel. Just once. No expectations." "That sounds like expectations," I replied. He gave a nervous half smile. "I trust you. That's the only reason I'm even saying this." Trust. The word should have anchored me. Instead, it pulled me deeper. "What about Jessica?" I asked. He looked away. "Things haven't been right for months. This isn't about cheating. It's about clarity." "And Daniel?" I asked myself more than him. Mark's eyes softened. "You love him." "Yes. But are you curious?" The question was unfair in its simplicity. Curiosity didn't mean dissatisfaction. It didn't mean absence of love. That's what I told myself. We weren't planning an affair. We were confronting confusion, naming something instead of burying it. That's how rationalization begins, not with desire, but with justification. Mark shifted closer, his voice dropping. "If this is nothing, we'll know. And we'll move on. No damage. No damage." I nodded slowly, as if agreeing to a hypothesis rather than risking two relationships. He reached for my hand first. Not aggressively, not impulsively, carefully. His fingers trembled slightly, betraying nerves he rarely showed. "Tell me to stop," he whispered. I should have. Instead, I held his gaze and said nothing. The silence became permission. When he leaned in, it wasn't forceful or cinematic. It was hesitant, almost cautious. The kiss lasted only a few seconds, but it rewrote something fundamental. It wasn't explosive. It wasn't confusing. It felt intentional. Mark pulled back first, searching my face for regret. "That was different," he said. Different wasn't the right word. It was deliberate. It was chosen. My heartbeat pounded in my ears. I thought about Daniel's steady hands, his unquestioning trust. I thought about Jessica waiting for Mark to come home. The reality of what we had just crossed settled heavily between us. Mark stood abruptly, running both hands through his hair. "I don't know what that means," he admitted. "It means we crossed a line," I said quietly. "Do you regret it?" I hesitated too long. Mark's expression shifted, not triumph, not fear. Something closer to validation. My phone buzzed on the coffee table. Daniel's name lit up the screen. Mark noticed. We both stared at it. And for the first time, I understood that curiosity isn't harmless. It's a doorway. After the kiss, we told ourselves it would be the only one. That lie lasted 4 days. Mark came over again under the pretense of talking it through, but clarity was no longer the goal. The uncertainty had shifted into something more dangerous, anticipation. Every message carried an undercurrent we no longer pretended not to feel. "I'm not gay," Mark repeated often, as if repetition could stabilize him. "I know," I would answer, though the word felt increasingly irrelevant. What we were building didn't fit inside labels. It lived in glances that lingered too long and conversations that felt intimate in ways neither of us admitted aloud. We weren't reckless, we were deliberate. That made it worse. Mark began coming over when Daniel was at work, timing his visits with careful precision. We avoided public spaces. We avoided mutual friends. We convinced ourselves secrecy was temporary, just until we understood what this meant. Understanding never came. Instead, dependence did. Mark started sharing things he'd never voiced before: his fear of disappointing his father, his resentment toward Jessica's expectations, his anxiety about living a life already mapped out. When he spoke to me, his guard dissolved completely. "You're the only person who gets me," he said one afternoon, sitting cross-legged on my couch. "With you, I don't have to perform." The words settled into me like a promise. I didn't realize then that I was becoming his escape, not his choice. Daniel noticed the shift before I did. He asked simple questions that felt like accusations only because I was hiding answers. "You've been distant," he said one night while we washed dishes together. "Did I do something?" "No," I replied too quickly. He studied me with quiet concern. Daniel wasn't suspicious by nature. He was perceptive. That made the dishonesty feel sharper. Meanwhile, Mark's tone toward Jessica changed. Less warmth, more irritation. He vented to me about minor disagreements as if they were evidence of incompatibility. "She doesn't understand this part of me," he said. "What part?" I asked. "The part that questions everything." I wondered if that was true, or if he simply felt safer questioning with me. The physical boundary between us continued to blur, but what deepened faster was the emotional intimacy. He began reaching for my hand without hesitation. He leaned into me like it was instinct. Our conversations stretched for hours, drifting from philosophy to vulnerability to silence that felt charged rather than awkward. One evening, after he kissed me again, he rested his forehead against mine and whispered, "I've never felt this calm." Calm. That word unsettled me. Calm was what I had with Daniel. Steady, reliable, grounding. What Mark and I shared wasn't calm. It was intensity disguised as understanding. "Then what are we doing?" I asked. He pulled back slightly. "I don't want to define it." "Because," I pressed, "because defining it makes it real." It was already real. We just refused to name it. The tension escalated the night Jessica called him while he was sitting beside me. Her name flashed across his screen, and he muted the call without hesitation. "You're not going to answer?" I asked. "I'll call her back," he said dismissively. He didn't. Instead, he turned his phone face down and looked at me as if I were the priority. For a brief, intoxicating moment, I felt chosen. That feeling evaporated days later when Daniel found me smiling at my phone. "Is that Mark?" he asked. "Yes," I admitted. "You two have been talking a lot." "He's going through something," I said. "And you're the only one who can help." Daniel's tone wasn't angry, it was wounded. I could have told the truth then. I could have stopped the quiet collapse before it gained momentum. "I would never hurt you," I said instead. It wasn't a confession. It was a deflection. The lie marked the point of no return. Mark, meanwhile, began pulling back unpredictably. Some days he was intense, almost possessive in his attention. Other days he was distant, distracted, preoccupied with repairing things with Jessica. "This is getting complicated," he admitted during one of our increasingly strained conversations. "It was always complicated," I replied. He ran a hand through his hair, frustration replacing vulnerability. "I don't want to lose everything." "Everything?" I asked carefully. "My normal life." The phrasing stung more than I expected. I realized then that for Mark, this was exploration. For me, it was risk. He could step back into certainty whenever he chose. I had already stepped away from mine. 2 nights later, he texted me, "Jessica saw some messages." My pulse spiked. "What messages?" "Enough." A long pause followed. Then another message appeared. "We need to stop." I stared at the words, reading them again as if they might rearrange into something less final. "Stop." Not pause. Not rethink. Stop. And in that single word, I understood the imbalance we had refused to confront. Mark had been searching for answers. I had been building hope. And now only one of us was about to lose everything. When Mark said we needed to stop, I expected panic. What I felt instead was clarity. Jessica had seen enough messages to understand there was intimacy, even if there were no explicit confessions. She didn't need proof of anything physical. Emotional betrayal leaves its own fingerprints. She's devastated, Mark told me over the phone, his voice tight. She thinks I'm in love with you. The word love landed differently now. Are you? I asked. Silence stretched long enough to become its own answer. I don't know what I am, he finally said. I just know I can't lose my life over confusion. Your life, I thought. Not us. Daniel confronted me that same week. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't accuse. He simply sat across from me at the kitchen table and said, "Are you emotionally involved with someone else?" The precision of the question left no room to hide. I considered lying again. I considered protecting myself the way Mark was protecting himself. But Daniel deserved more than deflection. Yes, I said quietly. The word fractured something visible in him. Did you sleep with him? He asked. No, I answered truthfully. He nodded, absorbing the detail without relief. That almost makes it worse. He was right. Physical betrayal can be impulsive. Emotional betrayal is sustained. It requires choice after choice after choice. I never meant for this to happen, I said, hating how weak it sounded. But it did, Daniel replied. And you didn't stop it. There was no dramatic exit. No slammed doors. Just a quiet understanding that trust, once eroded, doesn't rebuild itself through apologies. Daniel packed a bag that night. He said he needed space. I didn't ask him to stay, because I had already let him go weeks earlier. Mark, meanwhile, shifted into damage control. It was a phase, he told Jessica. I was confused. It didn't mean anything. He relayed those words to me as if they were strategic, not brutal. Did it mean nothing? I asked him when we met one final time. We sat in his car again, the same place where he had once confessed uncertainty. Now there was no vulnerability in his posture, only tension. It meant something, he said carefully. But not enough to change my whole life. The distinction sliced deeper than rejection. Was I just an experiment? I asked. His jaw tightened. You were someone I trust. That's not what I asked. He hesitated, eyes fixed on the steering wheel. I needed to understand myself, he admitted. You were safe, safe. The word echoed painfully. Safe meant controlled, manageable, contained. I wasn't trying to hurt you, he added. I know, I said. And I did. Mark wasn't malicious. He was afraid. Afraid of identity shifts. Afraid of social consequences. Afraid of dismantling the version of himself he'd built. But fear doesn't soften impact. You get to go back to normal, I said quietly. I don't. He didn't argue. Jessica eventually agreed to work through things with him, under conditions I didn't ask about. Mark reduced our conversations to polite check-ins. The intensity dissolved as quickly as it had formed. Daniel did not come back. He told me during one final conversation, I would have forgiven curiosity. I can't forgive secrecy. That sentence followed me for months. In the quiet that followed, I began dissecting my own role in the collapse. It was easy to frame myself as collateral damage in Mark's identity crisis. Harder to admit I had chosen the risk. I had wanted to be chosen. Not hidden. Not explored. Not tested. Chosen. That desire made me complicit. Months later, I ran into Mark by accident. The interaction was cordial, almost ordinary. Jessica stood beside him, her hand resting comfortably at his back. He looked stable again, familiar, contained. When our eyes met, there was recognition. And something unspoken. Regret, maybe. Or gratitude. I realized then that what we shared hadn't been meaningless. But it had been uneven. Mark wanted answers. I wanted permanence. He wanted to experiment. I wanted to matter. And that difference is what broke all the rules. Some people enter your life to teach you who you are. Others enter to show you what you will never accept again. Mark did both. And the hardest part wasn't losing him. It was realizing I lost Daniel in the process. For someone who was never truly staying.